What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So this is my second video about the Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua fight. And in that sense, it's a part 2 video, but it is also a 2-part video because the main reason I was inspired to do this was because some boxing fan commented on the first video and he was very mad that I used that fight and other examples, but that I used that fight to argue why MMA is better than boxing. And I responded to him. But I thought it was worth making a video about because I thought the ideas were interesting. I think he brought up some interesting arguments. I think they were all fallacious, and I explained that to him in the comment. But I thought it was worth getting those ideas out here for everyone else. So that's kind of the second part of the video. It's kind of part 2 of the first video. But the first half of this video I want to dedicate towards what Anthony Joshua could have done differently in order to not only make himself look better, but make the sport of boxing look better. And bear in mind, I'm sort of assuming the same performance. So I'm not making a video about the technique differences that he could make or the strategic differences he could make or anything like that. This isn't a video about how Anthony Joshua could have more effectively cut the ring and how he could have more effectively closed distance and how he could have more effectively intercepted Jake when Jake shot for those takedowns and et cetera, et cetera. It's not a video about that. It's not a video about how he should have just known Jake couldn't hurt him and tried to exchange more early on. This isn't a video arguing for how Anthony Joshua could have scored a round 1 or 2 knockout. This is a video still assuming the basic fight played out the way it did, where Joshua and Paul are both neither landing much for the first few rounds. Paul is just desperately trying to stay away from him. Joshua is eventually able to land some body shots. Paul eventually fatigues, and Joshua gets the stoppage eventually in the 6th. I'm still assuming that's basically the story of the fight, but I think there's a way that could have happened that, again, would have made Anthony Joshua look a lot better and save a lot more face, and it would have been a much better deliverance on what people wanted in terms of Paul just getting smashed by this monster whom we all assumed would easily smash him. And basically it comes down to body language and attitude and posturing, because it was just very visible that the trolling from Paul was getting to Joshua. It was visible that Joshua felt the pressure of the moment, that he had this impetus that he needed to get the knockout. And it was showing. He was getting more tense. He was loading up more. He was telegraphing more. You could tell he was frustrated. You could tell the goofy tactics of Paul were frustrating and kind of confusing him a little. When Paul was shooting those takedowns and stuff, Joshua just looked more annoyed and frustrated. He's looking at the ref and stuff, and it's just it's all a bad look. It all gives this impression of almost like the Joker fucking with Batman or something. It just has this look of a guy who's dealing with something he's not, that he doesn't quite understand and that he thinks is weird and that he wasn't expecting. And instead of immediately adapting and solving it, he's a little flustered. And that's a fucking bad look when you're the world champion boxer and you're at least a weight class bigger than this guy, and this guy's a fucking annoying YouTuber, and we all tuned in to watch you kill him. That is just not the energy we should be getting from you at any point. Okay? And again, I'm not saying he needed to get the knockout in the 1st or 2nd round. I think it could have played out the way it did, but he could have done things in terms of his attitude and body language that would have sold it a lot better. So what do I mean by that? For one, he could have just made more show of the fact that Paul was running from him. He could have done it in all sorts of little ways. He could have done things like when he tries to cut him off and Paul, dips this way and then runs this way. Anthony could just kind of smile at him and stick his tongue out and kind of wave his hand like that as if to signal oh yeah, I know this is coming and I know you just ran away from it, but don't worry, it's going to get you. He could have done something like that. He could have had moments where once there's a lot of distance and there's no way Paul can frantically try to sucker punch him or something, he could have just done a Michael Myers thing. He could have just kind of looked at him and just put his hands down and kind of marched at him and then kind of brought him up as he got closer to make it clear I'm Mr. X and you're Leon. You're getting away now because you're a little faster than me, but I'm coming and it's inevitable and it's inevitable and I'm going to get you. He just needed more of that energy, more of the stalker villain, the slasher villain sort of energy here. And like there's all sorts of ways he could have done that. Like he even with like the double legs and stuff. Sure, like I get where that was kind of weird, but there's little things he could have done that wouldn't even have been illegal or nothing, but just that could have shown more dominance and less frustration. Like imagine if Paul shoots on him and he's able to kind of not get tipped over and he's able to kind of drive Paul down. Imagine if he just stood over him and like pushed his head down like this and just kind of had like his hand on his hip and just kind of looked at him, you know, in a powerful, vaguely sexually suggestive way, and just kind of grinned and like waited for the ref to separate them and make Paul get up off his knees. Like just a little thing like that. He could do that and kind of look to the crowd with like a grin, like, yeah, look at this fucking pathetic, you know, look at this worm fucking cowering before me. And don't worry, it's coming. I'm going to finish him. Like he's going to, you know, this is just a mouse, or this is just a cat playing with a mouse. This is just a predator playing with its prey. Like, that's what this is. Like, this guy, you know, it's going to end for him soon. Like, that should have been the energy that Joshua brought to it. You know, every round, it should have been like that scene from Spider-Man 1 where he fights the pro wrestler Bonesaw. Like, at the start of every round, Joshua should have had the energy of effectively saying, like, you ain't going nowhere. I got you for 3 minutes. 3 minutes of playtime. Like, that should have been Joshua's energy. Is like, yeah, like, I'm a monster. You're stuck in here with me. You can run. You can hide. But not forever. You know, it's going to get you. Like, that should have been his tone. That should have been his presence. And, you know, it's just a shame he couldn't do that. And I get that this fight might not have gone the way he expected, but he should have also expected some trolling. He should have also expected Jake to get on his fucking bike. Like, this, not all of this should have been unexpected. Yeah, I get where, like, the double legs were probably weird, but even there, it's like, and this is where it connects to the second part of the video, which is, like, why this makes boxing look bad, is I gave you the example of, like, how he could have dealt with that by posturing, basically, by pushing him down, standing up, like, making a show of it. But it gets into like why boxing and other limited sports are so gameable. Because the guy in the comment section of the last video, his argument was, look, Paul was cheating. Like he wasn't gaming boxing, he was just cheating. You're not allowed to shoot takedowns. And, you know, there's things that are illegal in MMA. You're not allowed to hit the back of the head, because that's what he said. Like Joshua couldn't punish him because like when he shoots on him like that, he's not allowed to hit Paul and punch him in the back of the head, so he can't punish him. And that's illegal. It's illegal to shoot a takedown, and it's illegal to hit the back of the head in MMA, and it's illegal to eye poke in MMA. So like by that same argument, like did Cyril Gahn like make MMA look bad by poking Tom Aspinall in the eye? And if not, then like why isn't he the champion? Why isn't that allowed? Like, you know, so that was his argument against me, was basically that Paul was just cheating, that the reason Joshua couldn't punish him, you know, he couldn't hit him in the back of the head, is just a thing that's also illegal in MMA. And again, like, either MMA is a place where like everything's allowed, in which case why isn't Cyril Gahn the champion? Or if fouling and cheating, you know, is a way to like expose a sport for sucking, then why didn't Cyril Gahn make MMA look bad? And I see his arguments, but they're misguided here for a few reasons. One, there's a lot more that Joshua could do to punish him for shooting on him if it were an MMA fight, okay? Your only option is not hitting the back of the head. And if you did that in an MMA fight, if Jake Paul had an MMA fight with Shavkat Rakhmonov, and Shavkat was like fucking him up on the feet, and Paul said, oh my God, I don't want this guy to hit me again, I'm just going to shoot in on his hips, Rakhmonov would have things to do to him to punish him, and they wouldn't be resorting to striking the back of the head, okay? Like, the positional control, the submission possibilities, the ability to get on top and then land legal strikes that aren't to the back of the head, all that is there. And what that illustrates is that there's no phase of the fight you can retreat to in MMA where you're safe. And that's the difference. In boxing, if I'm on the ground, if I'm in on your hips, or even if I'm just clinching with you, I'm effectively safe. There's not really anything you can do to me. That's like a scoring legal move. Whereas in MMA, it doesn't matter if you're on the feet, doesn't matter if we're clinching, doesn't matter if you're on the floor and I'm standing, doesn't matter if, you know, we're both on the floor. It doesn't matter. There's no phase where you're safe. Because same with jiu-jitsu, because I compared in the first video, this and similar boxing matches to when like MMA guys go try out jiu-jitsu and they have a submission grappling match against some world champion jiu-jitsu guy, and they're able to kind of game it so that they neutralize the other dude. And they do that either by sitting in the guy's guard and just not allowing themselves to be swept or submitted, or they just don't even allow it to go to the ground. They just stand up. The other guy can't take them down because their takedowns aren't good enough. And they just don't engage when the guy tries to pull guard or sit down and invite him into the guard, or sit down and try to like roll for a leg or something. They just disengage and stay on the feet. And so that's what another one where like it's not like you're totally safe on the feet in a jiu-jitsu match because takedowns are a thing and even standing submissions are a thing sometimes. But standing submissions are so rarely a thing, and if you're an MMA fighter, your takedown defense probably is good enough to like negate this jiu-jitsu guy. And so all of a sudden the feet become like being on the feet becomes like a safe zone, a safe phase of the fight where you're just like unable to be harmed by this world champion. And it's the same thing with boxing. Like if I can just constantly be hugging you or constantly be like in on your hips or on the floor or something, like I'm safe. Like you can't really do anything to me. So these are like phases of the fight where it's kosher. And yes, to the guy's credit, Paul was cheating. Like he can't shoot takedowns in boxing. And if it were a different fight, he would have been like losing points and possibly disqualified. However, there's a flip side to that, which is Paul clearly wasn't trying to even like complete takedowns. He was just shooting on the hips so that he could more safely enter the clinch. And as it went on, there were times where he got pushed over and stuff and he was getting tired and it became this big thing. But like boxers do that. Boxers will do what Paul did. They'll get their head way offline. They'll crouch down low. They won't just come into the clinch straight on. They'll kind of lower and come up into the clinch, you know? And like literally all Paul would have to do differently for no one to be able to complain at all is just not fucking grab his legs at all. Like Paul could do the exact same thing, like moving his head all the way, coming in low, kind of coming up into the clinch, and just not fucking wrap his arms around Joshua's hips and legs, and you'd have nothing to say. It would just be standard like clinch initiation in boxing, which is a thing guys do. It's what outfighters do. It's what Floyd Mayweather made a fucking career of doing, was being on the outside and doing what he wanted, and when he didn't like what was happening, on his terms, he would initiate the clinch, because that's where he's safe. Like that's boxing. And anyways, all that to say, like, that is just different than targets being illegal. So yes, the back of the head is an illegal striking area, an illegal target in both MMA and boxing. And with good reason. My understanding is that historically, that's the first thing that became illegal in the sport of boxing, because boxing used to be no holds barred. You could kick and grapple and gouge and do all sorts of shit. My understanding is that the first thing they made illegal was hitting the back of the head, because guys were like going blind and getting killed and shit because it's such a vulnerable target. Now, any boxing historian, feel free to fact check that. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if that's a hyperbolic description of what happened and that there were like maybe eye gouging and other stuff was illegal first. But my understanding is that, yes, back in the day, boxing was, the 18th and 19th centuries, boxing was effectively no holds barred, and that yes, the first or one of the first things to be made illegal was striking the back of the head because it is so dangerous. So there's that. And eye pokes, yeah, I think should be illegal, but there's a couple of things here. Again, one is a target being illegal, and one is like a whole phase of the fight, on the feet, on the ground, in the clinch, whatever, a whole phase where the fight can't happen because of the sport's rules. One, and this is where, I don't like Joe Rogan, but I think he was accurate when he said boxing is the sport of punching, whereas MMA is the sport of fighting. I think that's very accurate. And I get it, we call them both fights, and that's fair. Like, I'm not saying we should only call a boxing match and not a fight, and that we shouldn't call boxers fighters, but I'm just saying, as far as what a fight, and as far as what an unarmed fight between two human beings can be, one of those is clearly the sport of fighting. One of those is clearly the more narrow sport of punching. And I'm not even against that. Like, I even see an argument for it, because I could see you say, yeah, but if it were a real fight, we could use weapons. If it were a real fight, we could use the environment. I can bounce your head off the pavement. I can do this, I can do that. If it were a real fight, we could use our friends. So if we're going to not have a real fight and we're going to instead have a sporting fight, why don't we just have a sporting fight with the cool shit, which is punching and knockouts? Why do we need the grappling and all this bullshit? Why do I need to worry about you doing what Islam did to JDM and just holding me in half guard? Why do I need to worry about that if this is a sport? You know, and we're just here to see who's like, to prove our gusto and our machismo and who can master the sport better. Why don't we make it a cool sport where we're just hitting each other? You know, so why don't we just make it boxing or just make it kickboxing? You know, I'm open to that argument. Like, if that's your argument, that's why you like boxing more than MMA, I can't even object to that. My preference for MMA is multifaceted, and it, you know, comes from the fact, above all, that I just want to see what martial arts and what combat sports are most effective against each other. You know, and everyone intuitively gets that. That's why Israel Adesanya became an MMA fighter. He said that straight up. He was one of the best kickboxers in the world, but he said, I hate knowing that despite how big of a badass I am, that some fucking grappler can just come and take me down and beat me. I fucking hate that. So I need to go do MMA and get good enough at grappling so that can't happen. And to his credit, he fucking did that. And I think every boxer deep down feels that same way, feels that same pressure. But, you know, nevertheless, if that's why you like boxing, is for that reason I just laid out prior, fair enough. But, you know, to circle back to the more important point of this video, there's a difference between a target being made illegal, like the eyes or the back of the head, and a whole phase of the fight just being off the table. And you see that because, again, you can box someone like Anthony Joshua and fuck around like Paul did and kind of avoid the fight. You can grapple a world champion jiu-jitsu guy, like when Brendan Schaub had that jiu-jitsu match against whoever it was, and you can just not go to the ground with them and you can just avoid the fight. But in MMA, you can't do that. There's no way to avoid the fight, really. And like I said, like the only things you could do are things that are just like so illegal you couldn't even like fuck around with it. Like because the only way to avoid the fight at that point is to try to like climb out of the cage or something, which yeah, is illegal. Although it would be cool. Like I would like to, I would be okay if it got freak showy enough that it was like that. It was like The Quest with Jean-Claude Van Damme or something, where like the fight goes from inside the cage to like in the crowd to outside or something. I'd be okay with it. But in any case, that's kind of all you can do to avoid the fight in an MMA context. And one thing that really illustrates this, you know, I talked about what Joshua could have done as far as showboating, as far as posturing to deal with the double leg attempts of Paul. But even just look at the sport of boxing. Boxing back in the day also gave you more options for something like that. Because go back and watch, I can't remember the name of the other fighter, but it's a Jack Dempsey fight. It's a famous one. It's against, I want to say the guy's name was like Jesse Willard, but you have to look it up. But it's a famous fight because it's Jack Dempsey taking on this giant tall guy. And Dempsey just fucking mauls him and he knocks him down like 8 times or something before eventually finishing him. But this is back when they would have a 10 count and there was no like 3 count rule or 3 knockdown rule in effect. So like you could knock a guy down more than 3 times in a round and they would just keep going as long as he could answer the 10 count. But more importantly, they wouldn't like separate you. So like what's literally happening is Dempsey drops this guy. The guy is like on the ground. The ref is counting to 10. The guy is getting up, but Dempsey is not like forced to like stand back here so that the guy can get back to his feet and then they can resume. Dempsey is standing over him. Dempsey is like standing over him, just like ready to hit him as soon as he can get back to his feet. So this guy is like all shook up and he's like getting back to his feet and Dempsey's right fucking here, ready to lay into him. And that's fucking brutal, and I'm not shocked that's like not allowed anymore, but that's something getting closer to MMA. Because again, if it were an MMA fight and Paul shoots on you and you push him down to the floor, you can do stuff. The fight's not fucking over. The fight's not paused. You can keep hitting him on the floor. You can grapple him. You can choke him, etc. And something closer to that is like that Jack Dempsey fight where it's like, okay, I can't follow you to the floor. I can't do ground and pound, etc. You're like a guy getting a 10 count, but I don't have to separate and start over. I can stand right over you and load the fuck up and get ready for as soon as you're on your feet and in range again. Like that's much more menacing and that's closer to a real fight. And that's a rule set that's harder to game and cheese your way out of the way Paul was able to do against Joshua. Because again, modern boxing, a pretty limited combat sport and you know, when it's all said and done. And it's not unique in that regard. Like wrestling's an insanely limited sport. Like most combat sports are limited rather than open. You know, whilst you have MMA and combat sambo and like full contact Japanese jiu-jitsu and shit like that on the one side. Most sports are more on that other side. Most sports are like boxing and wrestling and jiu-jitsu and taekwondo and everything else. Most are very limited. That's, again, that's an argument in favor of MMA, because not only is it, like I said earlier, the sport of fighting rather than the sport of punching or the sport of kicking or the sport of pinning or whatever. It is the sport of fighting. But on top of that, you just can't have this shit happen that happened to Joshua, because I gave you all those examples in the first video, but there's other ones too. Like, just look at CM Punk. Look at the story of CM Punk. Like, that's basically a Jake Paul equivalent, and he's a little older, but like, that's a guy with basically no background in this, just coming in and being like, I'm famous, I want to try my hand at this. And he was being less of a troll and more of just like a sincere guy who was like chasing a bucket list thing. But look what happened. They put him in there with like nobodies, with who was it, Jackson and Mickey Gall, you know, the second of which I actually saw live in Chicago. It was on the Whitaker Romero 2 card. But anyways, like, they put him in there with fucking nobodies and he's still going to do anything. You know? It's just, you just can't do this in MMA. Like, we've had this happen. We've had guys from other sports and we've had celebrities and shit like try to come in, and it doesn't work. Like, you're just not safe. There's no way to manipulate it and like surprise the MMA guy with any goofy, funky shit, because it's effectively all allowed. And like that guy said, like, what about eye pokes and groin strikes? It's like, you know, I would wager, like, you could allow Jake Paul to do eye pokes and groin strikes. You could say to Jake Paul, everything's legal. Like, you can bite, you can hit the back of the head, you can gouge the eyes, you can hit the groin, you can do whatever you want, and you have to fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. I still think Shavkat Rakhmonov is going to like kill him in short order. I still think he beats Paul. He beats Jake Paul. He beats him quicker than Joshua beat him, and he beats him more convincingly with less like weird moments of inaction and moments of Jake stalling and evading and moments of Shavkat looking confused like he doesn't know what he can fucking do. You know, I'd wager, I would comfortably wager that Paul can do everything shy of like bringing a weapon in, but he can any target, any means, fish hooking, whatever he wants. And he takes on Shavkat. I would wager Shavkat like smashes him. And that's Shavkat. That's someone who's like his size. If he took on Tom Aspinall, who's more of an analog to Joshua, I'm even more confident. So, you know, even though Aspinall just got poked in the eye and it ended his fight, let Paul do it. I guarantee you, like, it's not going that way. Like, he's not going to get a good chance to do it, I'd wager. So that's all I've got on that. And so, doubling down on why MMA is better than boxing and other combat sports. And also explaining to you that Joshua could have done things. Joshua could have done things in terms of his body language and his posturing and his attitude that would have saved face. That would have still allowed the fight to be slow and tedious and for him to get the ring rust off and et cetera, and for the fight to go to the 6th round before the finish happens, on and on. For Paul to need to fatigue a little bit, on and on. But that would have looked a lot better. Okay, so that's what I've got on all that.